a NASA spacecraft with 3 astronauts just about to land on the moon. It was close that suddenly an incident happened that no one could guess. This spacecraft was 322 kilometers away from Earth in a part of space where it took them 3 full days to reach the main oxygen tank of the spacecraft. Something malfunctioned and he jerked a lot. This oxygen tank was bursting, providing oxygen to the astronauts sitting inside. That is, the astronauts now understood that there was no chance of their survival. No, there was only 15 minutes of oxygen left in the cabin, and obviously, there is no chance of reaching back to Earth in such a short time. It is very difficult for NASA to send robots, but while alive in space, sending humans and then bringing them back to Earth safely is one such mission. It happens. If even a small mistake is made, then it takes years of hard work. At the same time, there is a fear of losing human life. To what the spacecraft is, it protects astronauts in space from the deadly radiation emanating from the sun, while also providing them with an Earth-like atmosphere so they can survive inside the pressurized cabins. These cabins are equipped with oxygen tanks to supply oxygen, and the cabin also has special filters installed to remove carbon dioxide. If for any reason an accident occurs in space, the spacecraft along with the astronauts inside will be lost forever in the dark skies with no possibility of return for anyone. But you'll be amazed to know that such an incident actually happened in April 1970 on Apollo 13. This is a true story that's no less thrilling than any science fiction tale. 1 year before this mission in 1969, Apollo 11 had successfully landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong was the first person to set foot on the lunar surface. After Apollo 11, the Apollo 12 moon mission was also successful, but now it was Apollo 13's turn, whose main purpose was to conduct further exploration on the moon. Apollo 13 was to land in a part of the moon where an asteroid, due to the fall of the moon, a huge crater has been formed, and this of the moon, the part is called Fra Mero. The commander of this mission was James Lovell, while they were accompanied by 2 module pilots, John Swigert and Fred Hayes. All 3 astronauts leaving his family on Earth. Apollo 13 missions off. It opened on April 11th, 1970 at the Wake John F. Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Because this was not the first trip of humans to the moon, this is why not many people were interested in watching its live broadcast. There were parts in which this part of the cone shape was called the command module. This command module, it was the same place where the 3 astronauts had to stay most of the time. The other part, whose shape it looks like a spider, it was called the lunar module, and its main purpose was on the moon. The third and final part was to land and take the astronauts back from there. It was a cylinder that contained the spacecraft's engine and oxygen tanks, and that is why it is also called the heart of the spacecraft. Now the plan was that first this entire spacecraft will come out of the Earth's orbit and revolve around the moon, and then 2 of these astronauts sat in this lunar module at the right time and launched the spacecraft. They will separate from and land on the moon. After collecting samples on the moon, the lunar module was supposed to return them to lunar orbit, where it would rendezvous with the spacecraft and head back to Earth. But little did they know that far from landing on the moon, these astronauts were about to face a terrifying accident they could never have imagined. It had been 55 hours since they left Earth, and the spacecraft was rapidly approaching the moon 322 kilometers away from Earth. During this time, when an astronaut routinely pressed a button to check the oxygen tank level, they suddenly felt a violent jolt. The shock was so severe that even the astronauts in the command module felt it. Because the module pilot Fred Hayes was known for his pranks, everyone initially thought he might be joking again, but this time, Fred Hayes was just as shocked and worried as the other 2 astronauts. Before they could process what had happened, the master alarm light and electrical power failure light started blinking. It turns out that an oxygen tank completely exploded due to 2 electrical wires coming into contact with each other. The mission commander immediately reported the incident to NASA's mission control on Earth. As soon as this news was received, panic erupted at NASA's mission control. because the engineers were well aware of the potentially catastrophic consequences of an oxygen tank explosion. A few minutes later, when Mission Control extracted real-time data from the spacecraft, they discovered that not only had one oxygen tank ruptured, but the second oxygen tank was also rapidly depleting. Additionally, 2 out of 3 electrical supplies had failed, which were crucial for operating the spacecraft. Handling so many critical issues simultaneously was extremely challenging for Mission Control. Meanwhile, aboard the spacecraft, Mission Commander James Lovell looked out the window and noticed gas leaking from the service module. It was oxygen escaping from the second and last oxygen tank. By this point, all 3 astronauts were acutely aware that they were facing a dire situation. Now the situation was dire. Their lights had gone out, they were out of drinking water, and they were down to their last power backup. To make matters worse, the air they were breathing was coming from their final leaking oxygen tank. Along with these issues, there was another terrible problem. Yes, due to the blast, the entire spacecraft had changed its direction. This meant that if they didn't correct their course immediately, they would be lost in deep space forever. So their first priority was to fix their direction. On the other hand, this news had spread all over the world. All those television networks that weren't giving importance to this mission were now reporting on the accident on Apollo 13. Along with the astronauts' families, the whole world was watching this tragic news unfold. Time was passing quickly. An hour and a half had passed since the blast. There was only enough oxygen left in the second oxygen tank to supply the command module for the next 15 minutes. At this critical moment, NASA's Mission Control decided to move the astronauts from the command module to the lunar module. Fortunately, the lunar module had its own separate oxygen supply. However, the problem was that it was a small supply designed for only 2 astronauts, but because there was no other option, they had to take this step. The 3 astronauts entered the lunar module, but NASA engineers on the ground were performing real-time calculations to determine how long it could sustain them. The calculations revealed that the lunar module could supply oxygen to the 3 astronauts for the next 2 days. However, the crucial question remained: when and how would these 3 be brought back to Earth? This was a question that no one had an answer to yet. NASA had 2 options to bring Apollo 13 back to Earth. The first was to use the main engine to propel the entire spacecraft towards Earth. However, since this main engine was running on its last fuel reserves, engineers were concerned it might fail mid-journey. The second option was to use the moon's gravity to slingshot the spacecraft back to Earth, which would require significantly less power. NASA Mission Control chose the second option, but this approach also came with its own challenges. Yes, the key point was that once the spacecraft completed a full orbit using the moon's gravity, it would then need to be ejected from lunar orbit and propelled towards Earth. This maneuver would have to be executed using the lunar module's engine. The lunar module's engine, designed solely for moon takeoff, was about to be used for the first time, a highly risky maneuver. Calculating when and for how long to fire the lunar module's rockets was no easy task. Even a small error in these calculations could lead to a major disaster. That's why NASA's Mission Control on Earth did all the calculations and sent them to the astronauts. The crew in the lunar module followed these instructions precisely. After orbiting the moon, they reached a specific point and fired the rockets for 35 seconds, finally setting their course back to Earth. 2 days later, the spacecraft was approaching Earth at a speed of 3,200 kilometers. Now they faced their most challenging task yet. Before re-entering Earth's atmosphere, they had to leave the lunar module and return to the command module. As only the command module was designed for re-entry, donning their spacesuits, they entered the command module, where the temperature had dropped below freezing due to all the computers being shut down. For Earth re-entry, they detached from the lunar and service modules. NASA's Mission Control and people worldwide held their breath as the moment approached when these astronauts would re-enter Earth's atmosphere without any controls. Due to the intense heat during re-entry, communication with the astronauts was lost for a full 3 minutes. When there was still no response after 3 minutes, everyone feared the worst for the astronauts. But then, suddenly, what everyone had been waiting for happened. They sent a radio message confirming their well-being. As soon as they entered Earth's atmosphere, they deployed their parachutes, which was now being shown live on television. Along with the astronauts' families, everyone watching was celebrating this incredible sight. Finally, after 5 days on April 17th, their module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, where they were immediately rescued. We hope you'll like and share the. Thank you so much for your loving comments. See you in the next exciting video.